You're listening to the Hello World podcast, number 44. My name is Sean Wildmuth, and I'm your host. The Hello World podcast is where you can hear from some of your favorite developers, authors, and speakers about how they got started in this business and the decisions they made along the way. We go way back to their first computer, their first code experience, and their first job. On today's show, I have Steve Evans. Steve has been doing DevOps since before the term DevOps was invented. He's a Pluralsight author, 5-time Microsoft MVP, and a technical speaker at various industry events. In his spare time, he manages a DevOps team at a Silicon Valley Biotech focused on improving the lives of cancer patients. For over 15 years, Steve has focused on making technology better for businesses by bridging the gap between IT and development teams. You can follow his technical blog at www.loudsteve.com or find him on Twitter at @theloudsteve. Like many of the people on this show, Steve and I ran into each other at different conferences, and frankly, Steve is one of the funniest guys in the room. I've always enjoyed his sharp wit and his quick sense of humor. I think that's why today's show kind of surprised me, because Steve and I got to talk about some serious topics around career development in this episode. I think whether you're starting out or you're a seasoned professional in the software industry, you'll get a lot out of our conversation. Let's take a listen. Well, today I'm really glad to have one of the funniest guys I know, Steve Evans. How are you doing?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm good. Are you still wreaking havoc in the IT world?
I am. Well, what do you mean by IT world?
Well, I think of you as an IIS guy. Is that accurate?
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, it's funny. The term IT guy is so,
loaded
all over the map that you kind of have to define what that overloaded term means. But yeah, I mean, so I currently manage a DevOps team. So I kind of sit in between both worlds, but definitely more on the server, operational, IT, IS, whatever term suits you.
So you're the guys that'll get called in when there's an emergency, or your guys will?
Yeah, the team that sits right next to me is the, operational on-call team. But yeah, I mean, when bad things happen with servers at some level, I get involved.
And you're in Silicon Valley, is that right?
I live in San Francisco Bay Area. Yeah. So I work near Palo Alto and I live more or less in San Jose.
Oh, that's nice.
So I'm kind of in that peninsula.
That's actually a pretty part of the world. Yeah, no, it is. South Bay it's a dearth of strip malls. I definitely prefer to be, closer to the city, but that's not where the work is.
Well, that's not where the kids are specifically.
Well, that's a point.
Yeah.
So as you know, the podcast is all about how you got started. And I assumed you were, running server farms when you were 4 or 5. Do I have that incorrect?
I don't think servers existed when I was 4 or 5. No, I guess I did, just not ones that, I knew about. Yeah. So my computer, my story is pretty normal. I grew up, so I just for reference, I was born in the early 80s. So when I was born, there were, computers were already part of households to some degree, so I remember being young, 5-ish, 6-ish, somewhere in that early elementary school. And we had, first computer I remember was a K-Pro.
Nice.
And all I really remember about it was playing games,
of course,
and mostly ASCII based games. And there was one that involved, it was a Donkey Kong ripoff basically, but your character was an uppercase P.
It does sound like the K-Pro.
Yeah. And then I remember probably when I was late elementary school, early middle school, we got a machine running Windows 3.1. And if my memory is correct, it was a 386, although that sounds wrong now.
No, that sounds about the right period.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because the significance there was I inherited it when I was about, I want to say 14 or 15. And that's really when computers became a thing for me. I grew up playing the piano. There was a rule in my house that you had to play the piano starting at about I want to say first grade. My mom might argue with that.
Interesting.
And so, typing classes were a big thing for me in elementary school. Mm-hmm. They're not for my kids now, which seems kind of odd. I've kind of started to teach them touch typing.
Interesting.
Independently, which seems totally backwards to me.
It really does.
Well, I guess they can type with their thumbs really well. So maybe that's all that matters.
I'm not going to touch that.
But so, I mean, typing was just relatively easy. Like, oh, these are, more keys, but they, my hands don't move, and, it's in English. And so
yeah,
typing came super naturally to me. Computers came pretty naturally to me. So I inherited this computer. And I remember coming home late at night, and the family had gotten a new one. So I got this one. And, after a little while being like, okay, well, there's not much you can do with this thing. Like, it was too old to really play games anymore. And, it'd be interesting for like word processing and stuff, but how often you do that? And
once you had explored cardfile.exe,
right. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Like, okay, I'll put the 5 people I know in there. But then when I was about 16, I was dating a girl who lived far enough away that it was a long distance call. It was one of those odd, like,
you were just over the border and
yeah, it was like 30 miles away or so.
Was this in California? Did you grow up in California?
Yeah. I grew up here. It's kind of sad how close I lived to my parents. It's, I moved away for a while and came back. But anyway, so about, dating this girl who was a long distance call, and about the same time, kind of the internet was becoming a thing.
Yeah.
I had been on AOL at like friends' houses, but it never really, my parents, they did a really good job of convincing me, and not even on purpose, I don't think, but I was convinced that we just were poor. And it's really just my parents, they're just frugal people, and they don't spend money just for fun. As a kid, I had the impression that we couldn't afford things, when really it was just my parents chose not to pay for things.
And Northern California has always been an expensive place to live.
Yeah. My parents are the type of people who bought their home in the 60s for $45 or something and still own it. So, but yeah, I mean, Northern California is not a cheap place. So anyways, wanted to send an email. Internet was coming along. I convinced them, but for school reasons, it was like I had some project that we needed the internet. And so I think it was Earthlink, 56K modem. And then from there, it just kind of that's where it kind of went from, oh, I'm good at computers to, oh, I know obviously I didn't know everything, but it was kind of like, I can do whatever I want with a computer.
Yeah.
I don't have to, there's no mysteries here to me. And then that translated to, so I played volleyball in high school. I played on a club team. We'd play in nationals. I was recruited by schools, and I went to San Diego State to play volleyball. Or at least I was recruited to play there. I never ended up actually playing for various reasons. And as my mom was dropping me off at the dorms, freshman year, 18 years old, she says, get a job. Which is, it's very my mom of like, you're going to be a responsible person, and I just, I started looking, I thought I could compete with Dell, and I would build computers for people.
Didn't we all have that,
Right. Yeah, exactly. Out of my dorm room, I was going to be Dell. But eventually I got a job. After a few months, I got a job at one of the departments there at San Diego State. And then that was in the fall semester. And in the spring semester, I was skipping classes so I could go work more. And then it, just kind of took off from there.
And so, was your passion about this, about what you're doing today, or was your passion just about, everything you could sort of do? Was it hardware? Was it software? Was it everything?
Yeah. So so the specific job I got at 18 was, desktop support, going around people's printers, why can't I log in? That type of stuff. And I was really, really good at that. I do remember probably my senior year of high school, maybe my junior year of high school, somewhere in there. I checked out from the library. And by library, I mean like the physical building with the books in it.
Yeah.
I went down to the library and I got a book, probably C++. I think it was, if I remember correctly, it was C++ in 21 days or something like that.
Yeah.
And I downloaded from a completely legal site, like the Borland IDE. And I just, for whatever reason, it just didn't click.
Sure.
And so I kind of went down that IT path of I'm going to be IT guy. And it turns out I was really good at it. I got lucky that the guy I worked for at that job at San Diego State, he was getting ready to retire. And this was right when the .com burst. So he was getting ready to retire. The .com bubble burst. And all of a sudden he had to work like another 10 years because he lost a bunch of money in the market. And bad for him, good for me in the sense of he was halfway checked out. He was actually one of the best bosses I've ever had in my life. But he was a little bit checked out. So a bit of him was like, oh, you want to manage the mail servers? Yeah, go ahead. You can manage the mail servers.
Right.
And really, he just gave me way more responsibility than I should have had at that point in my life.
Because of your age, or do you think it was above your head technically?
No, it was more of a maturity thing.
Sure.
And, I was pretty mature for 18, 19, 20 years old. I grew up in a household where my next closest sibling was 8 years older than me. I think I would have been considered a very responsible high schooler, for example.
Sure.
But I didn't really grasp the concept of like, this isn't a game. This is like a business.
Yeah. And people are relying on you and all that. Yeah.
I had the technical skill set. Technically I could tell you about this stuff inside and out. I didn't have the experience.
Sure.
And I think that's something that's really hard for young people to grasp is the difference between, so Windows 2000, I could tell you just about anything there is to know about Windows 2000 at the time. I could explain it to you in detail, inside out. I didn't have any experience though. And there's a huge difference there. And even today, I would have a hard time explaining it. And I think it's the difference between knowing what can be done and what should be done.
Sure.
When you have experience, you know the shoulds. When you don't have experience, you're just kind of like, well, you can technically do this, so why shouldn't we?
Do you think part of that is, the growth of pragmatism?
What do you mean by pragmatism?
What I mean is figuring out what is the best for the situation, not necessarily the most pristine or ivory tower technically, right?
Yeah, I think there's a piece of that. I know for me, only experience I have is mine. I think for me, it was more of being overly confident that things would do what you would say what they claim they were able to do.
Yeah, that's
and so it was like, well, it says it can do this, so let's do it that way.
Right.
And now with experience, I'm like, yeah, that doesn't feel right. And let's take a different path.
Or let's prove that it will do what it says it'll do before we rely on it. Yeah.
Yeah. I think there's just also the experience of, I was in the same experience 10 years ago. And it turned out like this, and I bet you it will do that again. Right. And, the young, if you're new to the field, you don't really have that background. But going back to the, was I always IT guy? I got a project at this job. So we had about 250 internal users on Exchange, and we had about 1,500 people in research projects on a different mail platform. I think it was called iPlanet. Mm-hmm. And there was a desire to move them all to Exchange. And so, we went from 250 to 1,750 users over the course of this project, or something in that ballpark. Right. And at the same time I went back to community college, to, at least to get back into the whole education thing, get a degree of some sort. And I was taking some, computer science, basic, data fundamentals, C, Java, just really basic stuff. And that's when I actually grasped this concept of like, oh, I can do more than the mouse, right? I can make the computer do something that it's not, I can tie things together. And I've never worked as a software developer, but I've had Visual Studio on my machine for 15 years now. Through that project initially it was writing Perl scripts to produce shell scripts that would transfer mailboxes. And by the end of that job, I was writing ASP.NET sites to allow users to, manage things about their account, without having, needing someone to do it for them. So, I've dabbled in it, and it's been super helpful, in my career of just, knowing that, and this was before PowerShell.
Sure.
If PowerShell was out at the time, I probably would be some PowerShell, have some significant PowerShell background. But just, I kind of got a head start in that of I can do more than the GUI presents me, has just really allowed me to just do what I want to do, in the IT space.
And was that driven by this desire that, the same person doesn't need to go out to the same desk and solve the same problem 13 times? Was it, trying to end this repetition of, whether it was you or not, but someone was having to, whether it's the migration of the email or whether it's, whatever it is?
I think it was a combination of I'm naturally lazy. Like I don't like doing the same thing twice. It's just not, that seems dumb to me.
Yeah.
Combination of that and, wanting to migrate 1,500 users in one weekend. It's just, you couldn't technically do it manually. Not well, at least. You end up making mistakes.
Error prone and all that.
And I think there's an additional combination of I'm a bit OCD. I think to work in my field, you have to have some level of OCD, right?
Sure.
And
or detail orientation at least.
Yeah. And when you're like that, you don't want to do something manually 1,500 times because you realize you're going to mess up 10% of the time, and then you got 150 oddballs in there, and no one likes that.
No. And so, in a lot of the kind of work you're doing, you're managing these, as you mentioned earlier, DevOps teams, and I'm sure earlier than that, you were managing other teams. Where did you learn that skill? Because that's that doesn't come naturally to a lot of IT people.
The DevOps skill set?
No, the managing people skill set.
Oh, so after I left that job at San Diego State. I decided for whatever reason, I wanted to live in San Luis Obispo. Mm-hmm. Which is this amazing town about halfway between LA and San Francisco.
Gorgeous.
It's okay. You've been there.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's gorgeous. It's got, for a small town, it's got a lot going on. It's got the wine industry. It's got the beach. It's actually got a lot of great food. I travel there fairly often. The one thing it doesn't have is jobs.
Sure.
And so I got it, but I wanted to live there for whatever reason. It was a bit of a whim. And I got a job at Cal Poly, the university there, working in the Windows Server team, and that so I was there for a year or two, and some things happened, and I was made the team lead or the technical lead of that particular group, and so that was kind of my first taste of having some level of responsibility over other people, other than. At the time I had little kids.
Sure.
But the funny thing about, at least in my experience, team lead or technical lead is it's really a lot of responsibility and a lot of authority. So there's that whole issue.
Yeah. Cause someone has to be the leader, but you don't necessarily have the respect that you're just one of the guys on the team, or what do you mean?
I think if you do it really, really well, you have the respect. But it's not like you've got the managerial
responsibilities.
Yeah, exactly. It's not like a lot of the times it's, go get the team to go do all this stuff the right way. But it's not necessarily like, and if they don't, you can discipline them in some way. You can deal with that. You can talk authoritatively to them,
right?
Which it's hard, right? I think as you mature and you get more of a leadership skill set under your belt, it's kind of like once when you become the director of an organization or the CIO, you've got the leadership skills where you don't actually need the authority anymore.
Right.
A lot of times when you're starting off, you do need the authority to help yourself be an effective leader. So, kind of the leading people thing started then, and I did a marginally good job at it, I think. And then I left for a couple startups, startup-y type places. And then I ended up where I am today, and I was originally hired, as an individual contributor. And then my manager left, and I was the quote unquote team lead for a little while. And then 2 years ago, I became the official manager of the DevOps. We formed a team called a DevOps team. Long story short, and I'm the manager of that organization. The question of, how did I learn that skill set? Arguably, I'm still learning it.
Sure.
Well, I definitely am still learning it. I think so much of my career was technical.
Sure.
Like for such a long time. And I think that's pretty normal. It's like technical. And at a certain point, you realize that the non-technical stuff is what's holding you back.
Sure.
Your inability to send an email to a group of people in a cohesive fashion and really get your point across is preventing you from implementing the technical things you want to. And then eventually it's we've got this project and there's a bunch of stuff that I don't necessarily want to do or have the time to do. And I need to convince other people to do it. And I need to train them how to do it. And so you start to, at a certain point, you realize the technical skill set just becomes you must be this tall to ride stuff.
Right.
But it's all the other stuff that really separates the good from the great. And so, through a combination of some people in my life, some people at my company, I really started to really focus on that and really, take an honest look at myself and, and get honest feedback from people and make real changes.
Sure. But that's a tough discussion, right? I mean, there's a point where you want to feel like you're really good at what you do, but only if you look at yourself honestly and go, tell me really how you feel, tell me what you really, really tell people so that I can make, an honest change here. It's being willing to listen to, the bad doesn't negate the good, but it's your only chance at changing that.
Sure. And I mean, I think at a really, really high level, if you kind of look across, if you go on Facebook and look at all your friends from high school and you put them in two piles, way oversimplifying what success here is,
sure.
But, I would guess the really successful people are people who are, willing to accept feedback and do something about it. And the people you see on Jerry Springer who are talking about all the bad things that have happened to them in life are the people who aren't willing to say these bad things have happened because I'm doing X or Y or Z and I'm going to make a change.
Right.
Personal responsibility, being willing to change, whatever you want to call it, I think is really what separates, the truly successful, contributing members of society from the people who struggle.
Yeah. So do you think you got that from your parents? Do you think you got that from early mentors? Because not everybody gets that message regardless of, what grade school they went to or
Yeah. I think my parents definitely instilled in me that personal responsibility. Again, I was the youngest by 8 years.
Yeah.
And so
they had a lot of practice. So
I think they not only did they have the practice, but I think there was a piece of, I think in some ways it would be hard to raise a 14-year-old and a 6-year-old at the exact same time.
Yeah.
And you would end up kind of expecting more of the 6-year-old than a typical 6-year-old would be expected of.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And I remember, in elementary school, it was like, you need to do your laundry because who else would?
Right.
And I think that's been, a very useful skill set to have. On the opposite end, my parents aren't very social people.
Mm-hmm.
And so some of that more, how do you interact with a crowd? How do you, handle yourself at a dinner party and stuff? To some degree, I had to learn that more on my own. But that core skill set of, the things that happen to you things don't happen to you. You make things happen.
Sure. Or at a minimum, you're a participant in that.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So maybe you got cancer for no fault of your own. The way you handle that is 100% up to you.
Yeah. And if you've been fired 5 times, it's not always the bad boss.
Right. And even if you got fired once and it was what you feel like wasn't, it was just a bad work situation, it wasn't 100% your fault, I can promise you there is some fault. At a minimum, you can say, oh, well, I've learned I don't want to work in an organization that has these particular attributes.
Sure.
And you move on, as opposed to, oh, woe is me, these bad things are happening, let's go try that again. And, there's nothing I can change here.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's probably one of the most useful skill sets I've had throughout my life.
That makes a lot of sense.
I feel lucky to have that. I feel really lucky to have that.
And what did, what's the word I want to use? As you're going through these periods, as you're going through, you've had a handful of jobs that you've moved from one to the other. When you've moved jobs, what was the motivation? I mean, of course, it's always different. But when you're looking at an organization, like when you joined where you are now, did you go in looking for a certain thing, or were you looking for a job? And what's the difference there?
Yeah. So I mean, starting at San Diego State, I mean, that was this is a job, right? This is a job and something that interests me. And then when I went to Cal Poly, it was there's not a lot of jobs, and I was already working in higher ed, and, so it almost was a factor of, I reduced my options down to, I need to work here.
Sure.
And then from there, I went to a couple pseudo startups, kind of maybe late stage startups would be appropriate term. And backing up, sorry. The reason I left Cal Poly was I had outgrown the place. I was at a point where I wasn't being challenged anymore. And the steps I would have to take to get in a position where I could be challenged again just weren't realistically going to happen at that point in my life. So it was time to move on. And really, it probably should have moved on a couple of years before I did, but that is what it is.
That's the nature of it. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I went to another place there in San Luis Obispo, and I was only there for about 6 months, and for various reasons, just didn't work out. It just wasn't the right fit for me. And there was another company I was doing some consulting work for, and they were like, hey, can you come join us? And I was like, oh, I'd love to, but you're in San Francisco and I'm in San Luis Obispo. And they're like, oh, that's fine. I said, oh, okay, well, maybe we can make this work then. And so I worked for them for about 6 months remotely, and then for about 6 months after I'd moved up here. And that was, again, a kind of a late stage startup. And the thing I learned from those two companies was, I'm not good at the jack of all trades stuff.
Sure.
When you're a startup, it's like, we got to do whatever it takes to survive this year. Mm-hmm. And I'm not good at that. What I'm really good at, where my skill set is let's develop this system or this process or this thing that is going to scale with us, which we're going to invest up front to get the long-term payoffs. Mm-hmm. And that's what I'm really good at. And that's just not, startups just don't need that.
Right.
Startups don't care if this thing is going to still be functioning in 10 years. They just got to survive this year. And I totally respect that. It's just, I don't feel like, I'm not happy there. And I don't feel like I do a great job at the, putting something together to keep, to get that next customer.
Right. To just drive that, paying salaries and or to move into the next investment cycle, whatever it is that that company needs.
Right. And so when I was looking, another thing I learned was, I really like companies that I respect what they do, where I can have a bad day and go home and be like, in the back of my mind, know it was for a good cause. Sure. And I got that from the university, working in higher ed. It's sometimes a little hard to see, but at the end of the day, you're helping people get educated. for whatever their career path is.
Mm-hmm.
And then
noble.
I went to a couple of places that, yeah, exactly. That, they do good work, but it was, making widgets. It wasn't, making the world a better place type stuff.
Right.
And so then when I was looking for the place I'm at now, when I was just kind of poking around, I was specifically looking for a place that was mature enough that they were ready to make those longer term investments. And it was kind of like we want more stability. We want to be able to reduce the number of people we need to run this thing efficiently. We want to be able to invest in, things other than people keeping it running.
Right.
We're ready to make those longer term investments. So I was looking for a combination of that and a place where I can, really feel good and brag about what the company does. And the company I'm at now, they do a genomic test for cancer patients that tell them how to best treat their cancer. So, it's something that you can really hang your hat on.
Yeah. And I get that part of it a lot, actually. I've talked about this for about 10 years where I would go take a big pay cut if I felt like I was doing something good. But I spent early in my career, I found an organization that I felt like was doing some really interesting, good work, and then it sort of fell apart because a pharmaceutical bought the company.
Yeah.
And so ever since then, I've been sort of looking for what is that thing. I don't want to just go and help increase sales numbers or just average, accumulate data so our sales team can do a better job, which is a lot of what corporate America does. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I just felt like I needed to feed something more than just the bank account, right? I needed to feed something. I need to feel good about what I was doing day to day. And, so I really appreciate that part of it. Yeah. I think a lot of the developers I talk to, when they're switching jobs for one reason or another, they don't like the environment, or they're looking for more money, or whatever the case may be, they forget that they're interviewing the companies as well. Right. They feel like they're the only ones being interviewed. And that just seems so short-sighted in the larger picture.
Yeah. I mean, I've been lucky. I've never been in a position where it's like, I have to find a job.
Yeah.
I've always, been in a stable spot and have decided to make a move.
Yeah.
I don't know how well I would handle the, okay, you just got laid off, go find a job type scenario.
It's not fun.
But yeah, I agree. I appreciate that I can make the conscious decision when I walk in to talk to a company that I'm just as likely to say no as they are. Right. This is a two-way interview, and I'm looking for things that are going to benefit me. The thing is, I work in technology in Silicon Valley. I'm uncomfortable with, we make obscene amounts of money. And so it's just trying to find a little bit more money on top of what is really an obscene amount of money already. Mm-hmm. Just, you got to really go past that.
Yeah, I would hope that most people can at some point. I mean, early in your career, it's hard to.
Oh yeah, of
hard
course,
to do that. But at some point, quality of life, I think, has to be a factor there. And whether that's enjoying what you're doing or having the other things like living where you want or whatever the case may be, it's all important.
Yeah, or driving your career forward, whatever is important to you at that point in your life. Yeah, I've got friends right now that they're going through the having kids stages, mm-hmm. and they're purposely picking jobs that allow them to be a little more available for their family. And I really respect that. Yeah. Whereas my kids are starting to get to that, could you please not talk to me, Dad stage.
Well, I understand that part with you.
Yeah, of course. Thanks. So anyways, I can focus on jobs that, are going to reward my career a little more, mm-hmm. Whatever that means to me. Yeah. But yeah, you gotta, when you're looking for a job, you kind of have to figure out, this is somewhere you're going to spend half your waking life on. Yeah. It should do more than just pay the bills. Yeah, I totally agree. Well, I have a question I like to sort of end on with most of our guests, and that is, if you look back at your career, is there something you would have changed? Is there some key decision that you felt like you went right and you should have went left? So the Avett Brothers? Oh, yes, I do. Yeah. So they have a song. It's like on one of their first albums, so it's not very well known. But they have this song, and the line is essentially, about not, all my regrets. I don't have any regrets because all my mistakes led me to you. It's this love song.
Yeah.
And I really strongly believe that type of thing where, I can look throughout my career. So I I moved to San Luis Obispo, worked at Cal Poly for longer than I should have. And I could sit there and say, oh, I should have left earlier, or I never should have moved there. That kind of stagnated my career. But then I look and I say, well, I was working at this fairly cush job where it wasn't very hard. And so I got involved with community and I started speaking at user groups and code camps. And I met some of my best friends there, from those activities. And I've spoken in large ballrooms at Tech Ed and other, big conferences. And so I could sit there and say, oh, well, if I wouldn't have moved to Cal Poly, to San Luis Obispo, I could have found a job that paid me more or was better for my career or whatever. But then I probably would have lost a lot of that other stuff.
Sure.
And I just think there's just too many, law of unintended consequences type stuff going on there to say, well, if I eliminate that bad decision there, everything after it would have been better. The company I was at before this, good company. I liked the people and everything. It was a bad fit for me though. It was just the wrong company.
Mm-hmm.
And I could sit there and say I wasted a year of my life. But the reality is I learned a lot. I learned a lot about who I am, what matters to me. I learned about how to deal with, people who don't necessarily agree with me on things that, it really helped me realize that people have different values of what's important. And kind of going back to a startup doesn't care if this thing works well in 3 years. They care if it works well today.
Right.
I learned a lot. And it was a hard year and it was painful, but I can't imagine being where I'm at today without that bad year.
Yeah.
So no, I really have no regrets.
That's wonderful to hear. It's wonderful to hear. Well, thank you so much for doing the podcast.
My pleasure.
Your view on sort of the life pieces, I think are really important for people to hear. I mean, I think some people tend to focus too much on what is the technology I should learn or what is the new widget or whatever it is. But I think your point about figuring out, how to become a better person, which means I'm a better employee or a better business owner at the same time, it really rings true.
Yeah. 25-year-old me would be disgusted with today me. I've gone soft.
Well, that's certainly true for all of us. Certainly true for all of us. Well, thanks again and enjoy the sunshine, I guess. I don't know whether it's
absolutely
starting to get cloudy there.
No, it's California. We don't have clouds.
I don't know. That's not my memory of the Bay Area, at least.
Yeah. No, it's rough. It's about 78 all week this week.
Oh, you poor thing.
I know.
You poor thing. Well, thanks again. And some reason I can't think of what the last thing to say. Thanks again for doing the podcast, and you have a great day.
Take care, Sean.
Thanks for listening to the Hello World podcast. Remember, you can subscribe to the Hello World podcast